Hey, this is Steve Lato. No law today. Today we're just going to go for a ride in my canoe up the Tahquamenon River with my buddy Mikel Classen. I've always wanted to do this trip ever since I wrote a book about Douglas Houghton. And Douglas Houghton was an explorer in the 1830s and 40s who explored all of Michigan and on a couple occasions went up the Tahquamenon River to visit the Tahquamenon Falls, and he did it by canoe. So here we are in my 17-foot Grumman heading up the river. Beautiful day in June. And as you can see, the Tahquamenon River is running right through some very, very nice areas there. Here's what the trip looks like from the sky. Each dot's a 10-minute interval. So we started at Whitefish Bay, the mouth of the river, and 16 miles upstream to the falls, and then 16 miles back. Had a great day to do the trip, but it was threatening to rain in the afternoon. So we had to be a little conscious about time. And did our best, and actually we rolled back from the trip at the very, very end, just as the rain was coming in to get us. So here we are. Like I said, the canoe is 17 feet long. It's aluminum. It's got outriggers on it. Don't really need them on a day like today, but I brought them along just in case. You got two full-grown men and a heavy boat motor in the back. This thing could get tippy, so just to be on the safe side, I've got the outriggers on. Michael's got 3 cameras. He's taking photographs. I got a couple cameras also, including the GoPro in my hands here, which is allowing me to get some nice shots, including this one here, the motor, and of course, down below. And the green light means we got oil pressure. The red lanyard is what shuts the motor off if I fall overboard. And the thing in my hand is the throttle and the tiller. And we're being pushed along by a 5-horsepower motor that's got 7 cubic inches of muscle. That's right, you heard me. 7 cubic inches. So, got a great day though. Look at the glassy, smooth water. Blue skies. Mid-60s. It didn't get terribly warmer than that, but it was nice. And the only time we got wet or cold, I got splashed by the pontoons from time to time when we got in slightly rougher water. And as you can imagine, on a river like this, there aren't waves, but there are occasionally choppy conditions depending on which way the river is flowing and which way the wind is blowing. And that changes quite a bit because this river twists and turns its way through the wilderness and through the woods all the way up to the falls. So it's a neat trip. I've wanted to take it for years, and finally got a chance this year, so I called up Michael. Hey, Michael, wanted to join me on a trip to retrace
Is that the campground over there,
a trip that Douglas Houghton took back in the days.
Oh, okay.
Hope you don't mind. I'm just going to step all over the vocals of the audio because it's very, very difficult to mic things on board the boat, especially when I've got cameras in 2 different locations. But Mikel Classen's a writer, fellow writer of mine. He's written a bunch of history books and books about travel in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and he lives not far from here. It's one of the reasons I invited him. But also I've seen his photography work, and so I thought, hey, whoever sits in the front gets to stay dry and take pictures with a big camera. Person in the back pretty much has got to use waterproof stuff, so that's the way I was looking at it. So Michael's holding down the front end, I'm holding down the back, and there's the campground. That cabin there, you can rent that. And then, of course, there's places for tents over there. And I love this shot down by the water. Not sure why. Just think it's cool. By the way, the canoe's older than I am. It was built in 1960. Aircraft grade, which is the way every canoe should be built. And then look at that glassy, smooth water. And as we head up the river, we will see less and less civilization. And a campground, I admit, is not much civilization. We'll see a few cabins along the way, a couple boats like that one there. We did not see any boats actually on the river during our entire trip. We ran across a couple guys in jet skis who were very polite and slowed down for us. And then we ran into a group of kayakers at the mouth of the river when we returned. But for the most part, we had the river all to ourselves, other than the wildlife we saw. We saw 7 or 8 bald eagles. We saw a merganser. We saw, I'm trying to think what else. Some animal of some sort, a beaver or an otter or something, was swimming along next to us and dove just as I looked over at him. I don't know if Michael got a shot of that. I know he got a shot of the merganser, though. So I'll put a link to Mikel Classen's website in the description below the video here. Check that out because he has a lot of photographs he took that he'll post there. The only photographs, the only stills I got were the photographs I shot with my cell phone because I was too busy hand-holding this GoPro for these shots like this. Just can't get enough of that scenery. And it's largely a cedar forest. There's other trees, obviously, in there as well. And as we head upstream, we'll encounter more and more pines, like white pines. But a lot of this stuff was logged out quite a while back Like I said, Douglas Houghton was a state geologist and an explorer in the 1830s and 1840s. And he came through the area and wrote reports describing all the natural resources. And his reports led to the copper boom in the Keweenaw Peninsula west of here. But this area was logged extensively because the white pine was such a valuable product for creating lumber. So, as you can imagine, this is also probably very, very beautiful in the fall. And as I'm looking at it right now, and yesterday I was thinking to myself, I've got to come back in October. It's still very early in the season up here right now. In fact, we saw geese sitting on nests still with unhatched eggs, while down here in the Detroit area where I live, I saw geese with goslings several weeks ago. So as you head north, of course, the seasons are a little bit off. There's a white pine tree. Anytime you see a big pine tree dominating over its neighbors, that's going to be a white pine. But a lot of these trees you see falling in the river are cedar. And that also explains the color of the water. Check out the water. You'll notice it's dark. It looks almost like root beer. And it's from the tannins in the water that gets in there from cedar trees that fall into the water and decay. And you might say, well, how is that possible that so many of them fall in this water? Well, upstream, the source of the Tahquamenon River is several swampy areas. And the swamps are cedar swamps. And they're dominated by cedars that when they die, they fall over, they land in the water, they decay, and then all of that material from those plants gets into this water. So all the way upstream, this water is this color. There are fish in there, you just can't see them. And it's also disconcerting. I've had my canoe out on Lake Huron, Lake Superior, and in several lakes with clear water, and you can usually see down a few feet. Out on Lake Huron or Lake Superior, you can easily see 3 or 4 feet down. In this water here, you cannot see within an inch or two of the surface. So we did stop. I ran over some lily pads earlier, and I was a little concerned about possibly fouling my prop. So Michael and I stopped. We found a place, which is very, very difficult, and I'll get to that in a second. But got ashore, checked the prop out. It was fine, and then moved my camera around out front. Had some technical issues, which I will admit are what we call operator error. Entirely my fault. But the rest of the shots will be shot from the nose here, the bow of the canoe. But we were looking for some place to put ashore, and if you look, you'll notice that neither bank here is a place where you can pull ashore. And it's like this for mile after mile after mile. The entire trip from the mouth to the falls is 16 miles each way. And you see very, very few places that you can pull ashore, especially once you get past a mile or so of the mouth of the river. If you were to try to put ashore right here, you'd obviously run into the foliage on the right-hand side or the foliage on the left-hand side. And these woods are so thick that you sit in your living room, look at your manicured lawn and your ornamental trees, and you think, how hard could it be to walk through that forest? You couldn't make it 100 yards into there without getting injured. It's so thick. And the other problem is, we discovered when we landed on a little tiny sandy spot we found, that clouds of mosquitoes descend upon you without notice. And you very quickly find yourself swatting at them and running, and you jump back into the water if you had to. But we managed to get back underway pretty quickly. But the other thing is that the mosquitoes can't keep up with the canoe. We're doing about 5.5 to 6 miles an hour here. But the deer flies can. And we had a few flies swarming us from time to time. And they are relentless. And if they get you, they'll bite you, they'll leave a welt, and it might even bleed. I've been attacked by them mountain biking before, and it was an ugly situation. But here we had a couple, but for the most part, we were unmolested by the insects. I was tending to stay in the middle of the river where it was kind of nice out, but by moving at 5 or 6 miles per hour, keeps the air going by you and keeps the bugs off of you. So that was pretty good. I am also trying to stay in the middle of the river because I'm concerned about the depth, not being able to see the bottom. I'd done some research on this before we left, and it said that the Tahquamenon River, generally speaking, is anywhere from 1 to 10 feet deep. And 10 feet's not a problem, but 1 foot could be. My boat runs in about 12 inches of water if you measure down at the bottom of the lower unit. And you don't want to rub that on the bottom if you can avoid it. But look at this glassy surface we're on right here. This is gorgeous. And my canoe will do about 10 or 11 miles per hour wide open. There's no need to do that here. On the way back, I hit it that way a couple times just because we were worried about time. But here it's almost a crime to do anything above idle just because you hate to disturb the surroundings. We did see some animals and so on. Most of them weren't bothered by the sound. They were more surprised by our appearance. I think they see a boat coming along, two guys wearing bright red life jackets. They notice you that way. And as I just yelled out in the background, we had passed the 12-mile mark right there, and the falls are at about the 16-mile mark. So obviously we're going to come up below the lower falls, and then the upper falls are a few more miles upstream. To our right, you can't see it, but there's a trail that runs along portions of the river called the North Country Trail. And you can hike that trail if you're a hardy soul. And if you start out in one of the parks, either the park at the lower falls or the park at the upper falls, you can hike between the parks on that trail. Each of the waterfalls has its own park, and you can drive there. You can park your car there. And then at the parking lot, there's also concession stands, information centers, and all that stuff. Restrooms, very, very modern facilities. And you can then walk out to the falls. They've actually got observation decks and paved paths. So it's one of the nicest park systems in Michigan and probably the Midwest. The Tahquamenon Falls are very, very well known in Michigan. In fact, I know many people who've only been to the Upper Peninsula once or twice, but they've always gone to the Tahquamenon Falls. By the way, dead ahead of us there, a bird just jumped out of that tree. That's a bald eagle. And the tree he was jumping out of was a white pine. So whenever you see these tall trees, like I said, that stand out because they're so tall and so big, those are the white pines that have survived all these years. I suspect those trees have been around for a long, long time. And they're going to be around for a lot longer, I hope. The Park Service, like I said, up here is very, very nice. If you get within 20 or 30 miles of the park and you're driving, you will see signs that simply say Falls with an arrow. It doesn't say Tahquamenon Falls, doesn't say Tahquamenon Falls Park, it simply says Falls. And I saw several of those signs with arrows pointing you in that direction. Up here, everyone knows what they are. That's what so many people come to see. They're about 45 minutes north of the Mackinac Bridge. It's a very mellow drive. Again, if you have never been across the Mackinac Bridge, especially if you're a Michigan resident, shame on you. You know, Michigan is comprised of two peninsulas, and our state motto is, if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you. And I've met many people who live in southern Michigan, the lower half of the lower peninsula, who've never been to the Mackinac Bridge. And I say, have you ever gone up north? And they say, yeah, I've been to Traverse City. It's like, yeah, it's still the lower peninsula. You've got a long ways to go. I love the whole state. I just love it equally. So, again, we are here on the Tahquamenon River, probably about 13 or 14 miles up from the mouth of the river. I mentioned earlier the mouth of the river is on Whitefish Bay on Lake Superior. And you may have heard of the name Whitefish Bay, even if you've never been across the bridge, because it's mentioned in the Gordon Lightfoot song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that is where the boat was trying to get that night, was Whitefish Bay. If you're out on the Great Lakes, storms can be ugly, and Lake Superior particularly so. And so if you're heading east, like say from Duluth or Marquette with a load of iron ore, and you get caught in a storm, you try to make it to Whitefish Bay. It's a very large bay, but it's in the scheme of things, that bay is enough to protect you from a big storm. And the thinking was that if the Fitzgerald had made it into the bay, it would have probably survived. But terrible tragedy there. But the Whitefish Bay, like I said, is why you would have heard of that. It's mentioned in the song. We are now heading up towards the lower falls on the Tahquamenon River. And the way the lower falls are, the two falls are very different from each other. The upper falls look like a miniature Niagara Falls. It's just a cliff where the water comes and boom, straight down the cliff. The lower falls, which is the ones we're going to see today, are actually more dispersed and like big rapids and big chunky stuff. I mean, they're falls, but it's several first of all, there's two sets of falls at the lower falls. And then there's stuff above them and below them that are either really, really big rapids or really, really small falls. Take your pick. So the falls are very unusual, but the combined, the Tahquamenon Falls themselves are just something everyone needs to see if you're in the area. And they're certainly the most grand waterfalls in Michigan, but they're very well worth the trip. And then we're going to be approaching from below them, obviously, and right below them is a large, I hate to call it a pool because it's larger than that, but there's a big area underneath, past the falls, and the water comes over the falls, and then there's this area, and then the river takes a hard jog to the right if you're on the water flowing with it. That area is interesting because it's the only place on this trip where we encountered current of any magnitude. Right now we're doing about 5.5 or 6.5 miles per hour, and the current underneath us is barely pushing against us. I'm betting the current here is about a mile, maybe 2 miles an hour. But as you get close to the falls, in particular near the spot I'm talking about, the current is so strong that you can feel it fighting against the boat. And you'll also see an occasion that we had to actually deal with what it did to the boat when the boat was just coasting. That's another story altogether. For the most part, what you see here is what you get on this river. Glassy, smooth water, and immediately to shore, just forest. And it's like that as far as the eye can see. And if you could elevate above it and look, it goes for miles like that in both directions. And we're in the middle of a very, very large state forest here. So we're not far from the Tahquamenon Falls. And occasionally you'll see me steering like this, and you might think that I'm just goofing around or not paying attention. But I am trying to keep the boat centered as much as possible. Because there are times, and you'll notice here that the water surface has changed a little bit. The weather hasn't changed. It's the wind and the wind direction. This river winds in such a way that you're literally going south, then you will turn really, really hard, and then you'll turn and you'll be going north, and you literally are changing directions back and forth over and over again. I forgot which way the wind was blowing, but when you're going into the wind and the wind is coming straight down the river like this, it makes the surface get like that. So it's one of those things, the direction of the river, the direction of the wind. You go around a corner and all of a sudden, boom, glassy smooth again. So a lot of different textures to the river as we were cruising along. But like I said, the water being not clear is disturbing because I'm guessing I'm at about 8 or 9 feet of water here. But I'm guessing that. I mean, I don't know. And we haven't had an occasion yet to actually stick something in the water to measure to see if we can hit the bottom or not. I don't think we could, but later on we encounter something, and I'll show you where we had an opportunity to do that. But the water is also rather high right now. We've had a lot of rain. In fact, this is a very, very cold and rainy start to our summer in Michigan this year. It's been kind of cold and rainy. And so the water level is kind of high, which I knew was going to be the case. And I purposely thought that that's a good thing to do this trip now as opposed to waiting until July or August. So the water level is up, but again, how up, I don't know because I've never been on it when it was low. So you'll see the big tree trunks and trees in the water on the left there, steering clear of them. We ran across one or two that we saw that were sticking out of the water in the middle or towards the side, and every now and then you'd see an obstacle, but for the most part, the water was relatively clear in terms of obstacles. My brother Dave and I went out on Lake Superior last year in July after that Father's Day storm, and there was so much debris in the water, it was like an obstacle course. Slaloming around objects out in the water, tree trunks the size of telephone poles and stumps the size of lazy boy chairs. It's nerve-wracking. Remember that Michael is sitting in the front, and he's got his camera, but I've told him specifically that you see anything, whether you think I see it or not, notify me of it. So he's calling out obstructions and obstacles to me. But, I'm in the back, and I've got my hand on the tiller, and I'm looking, but, I don't have the good vantage point that he does, and we are about 15 feet apart, so he's going to see it before I do, and so it's good for him to call out the obstacles. And like there you see dead ahead, there's something in the water that's, off on the side. We got no problem going around that, but stuff like that occasionally might break loose and float on by, and you don't want to run it over. And, obviously, if you ran something like that over with the canoe, it's a question of whether you get snagged on it or not. And, of course, you don't want to catch the lower unit either, because remember, the lower unit on this boat motor sticks down below the back of the back of the boat, probably, by about 6 inches or so. I don't know if you noticed or not, but this is an aluminum canoe, but it has a flat stern. It's designed to carry a boat motor, and the boat motor it's rated to hold up to a 5 horsepower motor. So I've got it maxed out on power. A couple different reasons I went with this particular motor. One is that it allows it to use an auxiliary fuel tank. The gas tank's built into the motor is only about half a gallon, a little less. You get about 13 miles on the gasoline that's inside the tank itself, inside the motor. But I've got a 3.5 gallon tank in the middle of the canoe on the floor with a fuel line running the motor. So we didn't need all that today, obviously, but we couldn't have done it on the 13 miles you would have gotten with the onboard inside the engine tank. On the right-hand side, again, you'll see an obstacle sticking out of the water. Over on that side, it's fine. Anywhere else would be upsetting, especially if we discovered it at the last moment. You look at a situation like this right here. See the tree on the right that's slightly off-colored and it's about 45-degree angle in. You look at that and you realize that in a year or two, that tree will go into the water. And so this scenery here is always changing. It's always evolving. Trees are growing up. Trees are falling over. Trees are getting in the river. Trees are getting washed out to sea, out to the lake. I like to think that when Douglas Houghton was here in 1840, though, this is pretty much what he would have seen. The ratio of white pines to other trees may have changed a little bit, but, this is about as untouched of a wilderness as you can find in Michigan in this day and age. It shouldn't be that long for us to come up on the park. Keep in mind that we're going to be at the Lower Falls Park. You won't be able to see most of it, but directly behind the trees on the right-hand side in the park would be where the parking lots are and the walking trails are and the buildings are with the concessions and the information and the ranger station and all that stuff. So we won't see most of that on this trip, but it's there, trust me. Been here a few times. I've actually been here in the winter time too. It's a fascinating park. The park's open year round, and I know a lot of people who snowmobile make a point to snowmobile out here and look at the falls in the wintertime. And it's, you see frozen waterfalls. It's a whole different experience. But also these ones, when they freeze, because they are made out of water that's the color of root beer, they freeze and they're a different color. So it's a whole different thing. I'm hoping that a little later on this summer I can recreate another one of Houghton's canoe trips. In 1837, he took a canoe from Sanford, Michigan, out to Saginaw Bay. About 50 miles, I think. I got to double check that, but Sanford is where he found some salt wells, or some places to sink salt wells, and he wrote some reports about that. And then he took a canoe out down the Tittabawassee River to Saginaw. And today, that trip will take you by all kinds of stuff, including the city of Midland and the chemical conglomerate Dow. And Dow is largely based on the fact that it sprang up out of the chemical industry that was started by the various things that Houghton had discovered there in 1837. So all this stuff ties together, but I'd like to go and recreate that trip also, just to follow that river down, because that one will have changed quite a bit since Houghton saw it. Like I said before, I suspect that in 1840 or so, or in the 1830s, I think he went up and down this river a couple times, that he would have been seeing pretty much what we're seeing right here. This has to have been pretty much what he was seeing. And check out those gigantic white pines on the left. There's a couple of you can see there. I've mentioned before, and I even did a video about the Estevant Pines near Copper Harbor. There's a park that's owned by the Michigan Nature Association, and it's open to the public. And they have some of the last virgin white pines in Michigan there, a whole bunch of them. I mean, a lot of them. And you can go out and walk around them, and it's amazing to see trees that large and that old still standing. So now, as we turn this corner, number one, you'll notice a few things. Notice the water has something. There's bald eagle, by the way. And you'll notice that the surface of the water in places has patches of what appears to be dust. There's another bald eagle. And the dust that you're seeing there is pollen off of the pine trees. It's actually pine pollen. So if you have hay fever, I suppose it's probably better that you're watching this video than if you were there with me. I don't have hay fever, so it didn't bother me at all. But when we got back from the trip and I was unloading everything was covered with this yellow powder. And that's what you're going to see patches of on the water here. So that's pine pollen. And then also you'll see occasionally white foam on the surface. And that, of course, is just simply a byproduct of the waterfalls. I think it's the kind of water and foam that gets formed by the water. And we were actually seeing this stuff drift by. It doesn't make it very far, but you'd see clumps of it. And here's a few clumps directly ahead of us. And floating in the water, those are just clumps of foam. And that foam will eventually dissipate and, disappear back into the water. But that dust, that film you see in the water directly ahead of us, that is pine pollen. Right there's a whole bunch of it. Now, I slow down here for a couple of reasons. One of which is I'm approaching the park, and I did some research, and I discovered there's two ways to enter the park. It's basically the left side or the right side of that island that's dead ahead of us there. And you'll also notice that the surface of the water now appears to have some eddies forming, implying that the water might be shallower, or the water is turbulent. But what makes water turbulent? So remember, I'm not exactly sure how deep this water is, and I can't see the bottom. So I've dialed the throttle down to about idle. I'm guessing we're doing about 3 miles an hour here. And I've also noticed that we're running into a current coming at us with a lot of force. And this current we're running into is stronger by far than any current we've hit so far. So I'm a little concerned about these things, but hey, I can now see where I want to get to. The finish line is right there. So, the question is, do you go right, do you go left? Well, I'm going to ruin the surprise for you by letting you know. The correct answer is you go right. Now watch me as I go left. And you'll see the big foamy things in the far right there. Those are not icebergs. Okay, so here we go. Now, again, even though I admitted to you I just made a big mistake by going the wrong direction, I am telling you that I was still trying to be safe here, so I did dial the throttle down. We were barely above idle at this point. And we are just going to go past this island and see if that can't get us into where we need to be. And now that I think about it, I should have thought this through and realized that, no, you want to go to the far right, but there's a reason for that. I'll talk about that in a second. If we come out that way, that's how we go home. But so again, very, very strong current coming at us. You can look at the surface of the water. A lot of tension there, a lot of eddies, implying to me that there's possibly issues with the depth. Trying to use the euphemisms here. And we're passing by the island. Things are feeling pretty good. And the fun thing, of course, is that we're going to be able to see what happens with the image we have in frame. About 3, 2, 1. And there we go. What was that? Michael asks. What was that? And that was me bumping the lower unit on the bottom of the river. Now, whenever that happens, it's happened once or twice, you very quickly grab the top of the motor and tip it forward and pull the lower unit out of the water. You also shut the engine off. The engine is water cooled, and you don't want to run it when the lower unit's not in the water. Minor point, but yank it first, shut it off second. So now we're dead in the water. Here's the thing. I can restart the motor. That's not the problem. But I don't want to restart the motor in shallow water and grind the prop off on the bottom. So I say, why don't we just try to paddle over to the side? So we turn the canoe sideways, and we discover that the current is pushing us rather vigorously downstream. And this is what you call a fool's errand, trying to paddle against this. Makes you wonder how Douglas Houghton and his guys did it. Remember, Houghton didn't have a boat motor, but he also didn't paddle himself. He actually had a bunch of guys paddling for him. So I realized, hey, you know something? Things are running fine about 100 yards back. Let's just go back to where we were, refire the motor, and then go over to the other side and head up the right side of the island, which is what we should have done in the first place. So, by the way, Michael did stick the paddle in the water up there just to be on the safe side, and he checked, and sure enough, it's about a foot deep. So, who'd have thunk it? And there's the motor running again. No damage, no harm, no foul. And you can see it clunk a couple times as I pop it into reverse and out of reverse. I hate to run it in reverse too much for fear that I'm going to back it into something and the motor doesn't tip the other way. So it's better just to reverse it for a split second and then spin it around and slap it back and forward. But this is a mental note or note to self. If you come back in the fall to do a fall color tour, stay to the right up here, okay? Kind of lessons you learn one time and take them to heart. And we're back and forward, but notice how long it takes to engage because we are being carried quite forcefully by the current. And I suspect if you see the amount of volume, the water that comes off these falls and then goes through this choke point, especially if it's shallow, that the velocity and the volume of this water are quite forceful. On the right-hand side, like I said, this is all now part of the park. And up behind these trees on the right-hand side, there are walking paths, and there's parking lots and buildings and so on. Can't see them from here. And likewise, when you park in the parking lot, you can't see the river until you walk over closer and take a look at, one of the observation decks. And they did a very good job of putting observation decks in different places. They've got interpretive signage. They've got posters showing you all the various fish that are in this river. I've had several people remind me that there's muskies in this river, muskellunge, which is a very large fish. And I'm not a fisherman myself, but I know they're down there, the fish. So, and we're going to head now into the section of the river at the base of the falls. Basically, what I do is I pull in, and we looped around a few times. Couldn't really stop the canoe anyplace because it'd be very, very hard to hold it in place. So I just told Michael, hey, break out the cameras, whatever cameras you want to use, and I'll circle a few times to guarantee that you can get the shots you need. And then once he got the shots he needed, I said, are you good? And he said, yep. I said, okay. Then we turned around and headed back. And like I said, our concern was they were calling for rain between 1 and 2, and the way the trip worked out, it was almost perfect timing that we could get up here, loop around a few times, and get back by about 1:30, which is I think what happened. And so, like I said before, we were loading our stuff up, and it started raining as we pulled out of the parking lot. But keep in mind, as we are at the base of the falls here, at the 16-mile mark of a 32-mile trip, you still see the blue skies, the high clouds. Things are still, perfect weather for us right here. So, but how weather can change over water, and with a Great Lake not far away, got to be careful with the weather conditions and pay attention to that. We did get caught in some very, very choppy water about a half mile from the end of the trip. We were getting splashed. I was getting splashed kind of hard off the pontoons. So I don't know if Michael was or not, but I was. Again, look at all the pollen on the water. And now we're going to turn and look. And I apologize. This is kind of a distant shot. But we're going to turn in a second, and you will see the falls that are on the right. And then I'm going to show you a photograph that Michael took. And then I'm going to show you some video that I shot standing by the side of the falls last year, just to show you what they look like, because we could not get that kind of a shot today without getting out of the canoe and hiking over. We didn't have that kind of time. So first, we're going to take a look at the falls. And like I said, they're off in the distance, but you'll see Michael's got a big lens on his camera. There's the falls right there, one set of the falls. And there's a set of falls on the left. These are the falls on the right. And there's Michael's shot with a big lens. Now, see where the guy in the black shirt's standing? I took a camera there last summer and shot this. Kind of an overcast day, and I apologize, but that's about the best I could do for you on this one. But that's what those falls look like up close. And then here we are. There's like an island that splits the river right there. The one set of falls on the right and the one set of falls on the left. And Michael got a shot of these, again, with a big lens. There you go. So that wraps up the trip to the Tahquamenon Falls from the mouth of the Tahquamenon River from Whitefish Bay, Lake Superior. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out the links below. I'll put a link to Mikel Classen's website. He does a lot of great work, great writing, great photography. And I'll be taking some more canoe trips this summer. I hope you'll join me. And as always, questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.